Hello everyone, and welcome back. Today, I'm excited to introduce you to a new series called Outside of Time. Outside of Time is the sixth major work by author Ergen. It follows Xu Qing, a young survivor in a world devastated by the descent of a so-called god. With humanity on the verge of extinction, vicious beasts roaming freely, and people turning against one another, staying alive becomes nearly impossible. Yet in the face of despair, Xu Qing makes one unwavering decision. If cultivation can't give him the power to fight a god, then he will become one. This is the story of an ordinary teenager who rises, step by step, toward divine power in order to survive. If you enjoy the series, don't forget to hit the like button and subscribe to the channel to stay updated with our newest episodes. And now, let's jump straight into episode 1 of the series. March, the beginning of spring. At a corner of the eastern part of Nanwang continent, the hazy sky was a stretch of gray and black, emitting a heavy sense of oppression. It was as if someone had splattered ink on drawing paper, allowing the ink to soak the sky, smudging the clouds. The storm above seemed to churn restlessly, folding layer after layer of heavy clouds into a single mass. From time to time, streaks of red lightning crackled across the heavens, splitting the sky with a violent glow as thunder rolled like distant, angry gods. And then came the rain, thick, blood-colored droplets falling with a mournful heaviness, staining the ruined land below. Amid this desolation lay a once flourishing city, now hollow and lifeless. Streets that had once carried the footsteps and laughter of countless people were silent. The sandy roads were soaked into muddy, clotted red paths. Everywhere, collapsed houses leaned against each other like broken bones. Greenish-black corpses lay scattered across the ground, twisted, still, and long stripped of warmth. Shredded flesh mixed with dust and soaked paper until none could be distinguished from the other. It was a landscape drowned in tragedy. Deep within this devastated scene, a shattered wooden carriage lay half-sunken in the mud. Its wood had rotted from wind and water. But one thing still clung to it, an old bunny puppet tied to the shaft of the carriage. Once white, its fur was now permanently dyed the same blood-red shade as the rain. It hung limply, swaying with each gust of wind, its glass-like eyes cloudy and filled with an eerie, almost resentful loneliness. Not far from the carriage, a youth lay motionless on the ground. This was Xu Qing, 13 to 14 years old, thin, bruised, and wearing clothing so tattered that the cold rain pierced through every tear. Tied at his waist was a small leather pouch, old, worn, but clearly precious to him. Xu Qing's body trembled from the chill, yet his eyes were sharp and unblinking. Even with icy raindrops sliding down his face, he did not so much as blink. Like a wounded wolf, he remained absolutely focused on something in the distance. 7 or 8 zhang away, a starved vulture was tearing into the rotten belly of a dead wild dog. Every few bites, it lifted its head, scanning its surroundings with skittish, suspicious jerks. In a place where danger lurked behind every shadow, even a vulture understood that survival came only to the wary. Xu Qing waited. Patience was something he had learned young, patience, and the discipline to ignore pain, hunger, and even fear. He remained absolutely still until the moment the greedy bird finally buried its entire head deep into the corpse in search of more meat. That was the opening he needed. His eyes narrowed, and a cold gleam flashed through them. In a single breath, Xu Qing shot forward like a released arrow. As he moved, his right hand darted to his waist and pulled out the black iron stick hidden in his pouch. Its sharpened tip glinted faintly despite the dim light. The vulture sensed danger and jerked its head up, wings beating frantically, but fear alone could not save it. With a practiced motion, Xu Qing flicked his wrist. The iron stick whistled through the air as it transformed into a streak of black. A wet, sharp sound followed. The stick pierced through the vulture's skull with brutal precision, smashing into the carriage behind it. The impact made the wooden structure shudder, and even the blood-soaked bunny puppet bounced and swayed violently. Xu Qing never stopped moving. He rushed to the carriage, yanked the iron stick free, grabbed the vulture's corpse, and tore away the loosened plank of wood without hesitation. His movements were swift, silent, and efficient, habits of someone who had learned that hesitation meant death. Without looking back, he sprinted deeper into the ruined streets. The wind intensified, cutting through his thin clothes like icy knives. The puppet on the carriage twirled in the bloody wind, almost as if watching him leave. Xu Qing shivered and pulled his rags tighter. But he did not slow down. He hated the cold. It reminded him of too many nights surviving on scraps, of too many days spent trembling in hidden corners while the world around him collapsed. He needed shelter, somewhere to apply medicine, somewhere to breathe. But today, he had something else he must accomplish first. The vulture hunt had already cost precious daylight, and darkness was far more dangerous than corpses or storm winds. It shouldn't be far now, he muttered under his breath, forcing his aching legs to push forward. All along the road, bodies stared blankly at him, faces twisted in fear, malice, despair. Once, the sight of corpses might have frightened him. Now, after all he had seen, they were simply part of the world he lived in. He scarcely spared them a glance. The sky darkened further, and Xu Qing's anxiety grew. Shadows crawled faster at dusk, and he could not afford to be caught outside when night truly fell. Every time thunder rumbled, he worried the storm would swallow what little light remained. Then, finally, he spotted it, a small medical shop ahead, its sign barely hanging by one hinge. He exhaled deeply, relief softening his expression for the first time. With quick strides, he pushed inside. The interior was a wreck. Rows of medicine cabinets lay scattered across the floor. Most of the herbs had turned the same sickly greenish-black shade as the corpses outside. An old man's body sat slumped in the corner, back against the wall, mouth slightly open and eyes wide with what seemed like the final traces of unwillingness. Xu Qing glanced at him once, then turned away and began his search through the ruined store. He sifted through broken drawers, overturned boxes, and scattered bundles of herbs. Almost everything had rotted, only a few pieces still retained their original color. He crouched down, examining each one carefully. He tried to recall what he had learned, what the old wanderers once taught him, what he had picked up from scavenging countless abandoned places like this. At last, he found what he needed: golden sore grass, one of the few herbs capable of suppressing infection. Xu Qing removed his thin shirt, revealing the wound on his chest. It ran across the left side of his ribcage, deep and ugly. The edges were already turning black, a sign that infection had begun to spread. Fresh blood oozed slowly from the reopened tear. He crushed the herb into a paste, took a long, steadying breath, and gritted his teeth. Then he pressed the medicine directly onto the wound. Agony surged through him at once. His entire body shuddered violently from the shock of pain. But he did not cry out. Xu Qing had endured worse. He clenched his jaw, forcing himself to stay still, forcing himself to continue breathing even as his vision wavered. Sweat poured down his forehead, dripping off his chin and onto the dark, dusty floor. Even so, there was no way for him to stop the sweat from emerging on his forehead. The droplets of sweat then began flowing down his face, dripping onto the dark ground. The tears formed small spots of water akin to ink on the dark ground. The entire process persisted for over 10 breaths. After he finished smearing the medicinal herb paste over his wound completely, the youth seemed to have lost all his strength. Xu Qing leaned heavily against a fallen cabinet, trying to steady his breath. Every muscle in his body trembled as the last ripples of pain faded into a deep, throbbing ache. It took him quite some time before he could finally exhale and force himself to move again. Slowly, with hands that still shook from the agony, he pulled his thin, ragged clothes back over his injured chest. He turned toward the shattered doorway and glanced at the sky. The light outside was fading, swallowed inch by the red clouds and the heavy rain. Time was slipping away. He knew that once true night fell upon this ruined city, danger would multiply beyond measure. After a moment of contemplation, Xu Qing reached into his leather pouch once more and carefully removed a small fragmented map. The map was crude and hand-drawn, nothing more than uneven lines marking the general layout of the city. But for him, it was a treasure, one of the few tools he possessed to survive. Several locations were scratched out with deep fingernail marks, especially in the northeastern part of the city. Only 2 areas remained unmarked. Those were the last places yet to be searched. Xu Qing whispered to himself in a hoarse voice. After searching for these few days, it should be inside one of these two remaining areas. His tone carried determination, but also exhaustion. He folded the map with great care and slipped it back into his pouch. He prepared to leave, but then froze. His gaze drifted toward the old man's corpse leaning against the wall. His eyes lowered to the man's clothing. A leather coat, thick, sturdy, and surprisingly preserved despite the corrosive rain and the decay that claimed almost everything in this city. Warmth meant survival, and Xu Qing had no luxury of refusing anything that could help him live another day. He approached the corpse, hesitating only for a breath before pulling the coat free from its stiff, lifeless body. The garment was slightly oversized for him, but when he wrapped it around his thin frame, a faint warmth seeped into his skin. It was the first real warmth he had felt in days. Xu Qing looked at the old man's face. Those eyes, wide open and filled with lingering unwillingness, stared blankly at the world. Gently, Xu Qing raised his hand and brushed the eyelids closed. "Rest in peace," he murmured softly. He tore down a portion of the shop's curtains and draped it over the old man's body, creating at least a small semblance of dignity before turning toward the exit. As he stepped outside, something glimmered faintly near his foot. Xu Qing paused and crouched down. Buried in the blood-soaked mud was a palm-sized fragment of a mirror. When he lifted it, the surface reflected his face, smudged with dirt and rain, yet unmistakably delicate, almost beautiful beneath the grime. But that beauty was overshadowed by the coldness in his eyes, a chill far more pronounced than anything a youth of 13 or 14 should possess. He stared for a long moment. Something deep within him stirred, something heavy, wordless, and old. Then, without hesitation, he dropped the mirror and brought his heel down. A cracking sound followed as fractures spread across the shard like spiderwebs. Leaving it behind, Xu Qing resumed his journey through the ruined streets. The broken mirror, lying in the mud, now reflected a distorted image of the sky. The clouds formed the outline of a colossal, fragmented divine face, an ancient visage that hung over the world like a silent, oppressive deity. Its closed eyes and drifting wisps of withered hair seemed to whisper that all living beings were insignificant. Under such gods, everything on earth was forced to change, forced to adapt, forced to bow. As the sun weakened behind the clouds, the sky dimmed rapidly. Shadows thickened into a dark fog creeping over the ruins like a devouring beast. The blood-colored rain intensified, and the wind began to howl like tormented spirits echoing through the hollow streets. Xu Qing ran. The moment he heard the sharpened whistling of the wind, the kind that sounded like ghosts wailing, he accelerated. His steps became faster, sharper, as he wove through debris and collapsed walls. The night was coming, and he knew what came with it. He sprinted past a ruined house, only to suddenly halt. From the corner of his eye, he caught sight of something that sent a jolt through him. Someone was sitting among the rubble. The figure's clothing was neat. There were no visible wounds. And most importantly, his skin was the color of life, not the greenish-black shade of the dead. Xu Qing's heart hammered. Another living person. In days of searching, he had not encountered even a single survivor. Yet this one sat calmly against the wall, almost as if waiting. He considered approaching. A living person in this city could mean help or danger. But before he could decide, the suffocating darkness of the approaching night crawled toward him. The smog-like shadow chased at his heels. He clenched his jaw, memorized the location with absolute precision, and turned away. There was no time. Night came first. Everything else came after. Xu Qing ran non-stop, his breath burning in his lungs. He only stopped once he reached his temporary shelter, a narrow cave hidden behind debris. Small enough that only someone of his size could squeeze inside. He slipped through the narrow entrance, then immediately began blocking it with broken books, stones, and anything that could seal the gap. By the time he placed the last barrier, the darkness slammed into the city like a living creature. Inside, Xu Qing held his iron stick tightly. He crouched in silence, listening. The night awakened the horrors. Roars of mutated beasts echoed across the city. High-pitched shrieks sliced through the air. Strange chittering laughter rippled through the darkness as unseen creatures prowled, feeding, searching. Twice, a loud, resonant roar responded to the others, shaking the debris around him. Only after the noises drifted farther and farther away did Xu Qing allow himself to exhale. His body slumped back against the cave wall, finally able to relax. If only slightly. The cave was pitch black. He could not see his own hand. But he did not need light. Everything he did now was routine. With the darkness enveloping him, Xu Qing slid his hand across the ground until it found the water flask. He took several deep gulps, ignoring the muffled cries of beasts outside. Then he reached into his pocket and pulled out the vulture he had hunted earlier. In the suffocating darkness, he began to eat. The raw flesh tasted foul and metallic. A thick, nauseating stench of blood rose in his throat with each bite. But Xu Qing chewed steadily, forcing the meat down. Hunger was a harsher master than disgust. His stomach churned violently but continued to accept the food, because it had no choice. Piece by piece, he devoured the entire bird. Not a scrap remained. When he finished, Xu Qing wiped his mouth and drew in a long, weary breath. Fatigue washed over him instantly, heavy like the night pressing against the cave walls. His eyes slowly drifted shut. Very soon, he finished the entire vulture. The youth then drew in a deep breath as waves of fatigue flooded his body. His eyes also slowly closed. However, his hand still held the black-colored iron stick tightly, as though he was a lone wolf taking a nap. It was as though he would open his eyes instantly the moment there was anything strange. At this moment in the outside world, darkness was like a curtain, enveloping the city, the land, and the sky. In that suffocating darkness, a broken and devastated world stretched far beyond the horizon, an immense land known as the Nanwang continent. Itself only a single piece of a world so vast that very few living beings could even attempt to measure its borders. Yet no matter where one stood, all they needed to do was tilt their head upward and they would see it, the enormous fragmented face that hovered eternally in the heavens. Its presence alone radiated a dread powerful enough to crush the heart of any living creature. No one knew when it first descended, only that ancient texts had recorded a time when this world was prosperous, abundant, and filled with spiritual vitality. That golden era ended the moment this gigantic face drifted out from the depths of the void. When it approached, every race, every sect, and every life form tried desperately to stop it, but all failed. In the end, only a few ancient kings and sovereigns managed to evacuate a portion of the human race to safer realms, abandoning everything else to fate. After they departed, the fragmented face settled in the sky, and the nightmare began. Its terrible aura seeped into mountains, oceans, rivers, plants, beasts, mortals, and even the very force that cultivators depended on to grow stronger. Everything that existed began to decay. Life extinguished. Less than 1 out of 100 survived. From then onward, the survivors could only call this face a god, while the land destroyed beneath it came to be known as Ensoil. Those safe places the ancient kings fled to were now revered as holy lands. The world adapted to this new reality, yet the disasters never ceased. Every few years, or sometimes after decades or centuries had passed, the fragmented face would suddenly open its eyes. Whenever that happened, the area caught in its gaze would be drenched in a terrifying aura, instantly turning into a forbidden zone where nothing living could survive. For centuries, these forbidden zones multiplied, swallowing city after city until barely any safe places were left. And 9 days earlier, the god opened its eyes once more, staring directly at the region where Xu Qing lived. Dozens of cities, countless villages, every species within that radius. From the wealthy heart of the metropolis to the ragged slums outside its walls, all were struck at the same instant. The taint spread like a storm. Lives liquefied into blood, others twisted into monstrous creatures stripped of reason. Still others collapsed as green-black corpses with no soul remaining. But a tiny handful survived. For reasons unknown. Xu Qing was one of them. Now, inside his dark cave hidden behind jagged rocks, a sharp and eerie shriek echoed from far away. Growing closer, Xu Qing's eyes snapped open. His hand tightened around the iron stick he kept by his side. and he silently shifted to watch the thin sliver of the blocked entrance. Only when the cry circled the area and faded into the distance did he exhale softly. He no longer felt sleep tugging at him. Instead, he reached into the small leather pouch he carried everywhere and drew out a bamboo slip. In the darkness, he ran his fingers gently across the carved characters. As though the touch alone steadied his heart, a faint glimmer appeared in his eyes before he straightened his back and began his breathing exercises. Xu Qing had grown up alone in the slums outside the city, a place where hunger, disease, and violence claimed lives every day. Survival was the only law. And yet, 9 days ago, when the catastrophe arrived, he had not panicked like the others. As he hid in this cave, he had gazed at the fragmented face opening its eyes. He saw its strange cross-shaped pupils. Something in that moment stripped fear away from him. Then he saw something else. A narrow beam of purple light descending from the sky, striking the northeastern part of the city. After that, darkness overtook him. When he awakened, everything around him, inside the city and outside, was dead. Only he remained. But Xu Qing knew better than to leave immediately. The moment the god opened its eyes, the taint created a barrier. Blood rain would fall, sealing the entire region. No one could escape, and no outsider could enter, until the forbidden zone fully stabilized. Only when the blood rain ceased would that stabilization be complete. To Xu Qing, who had survived winters without shelter and nights stalked by wild dogs, this was merely one more ordeal. Life in the slums had taught him that death lurked everywhere, and that survival meant pushing forward no matter how bleak the world became. Yet even in that harsh place, hints of warmth remained. Down on their luck, scholars would sometimes teach children how to read in exchange for scraps of food. And Xu Qing carried fading memories of relatives, memories he clung to desperately even as time blurred their faces. He knew he was not an orphan. Somewhere in the world, his kin existed, but the slums swallowed people easily. And once gone, contact was often lost forever. And so his dream was simple: survive, and maybe, someday, find his family again. Now, having lived through this disaster, Xu Qing chose to enter the ruined city. He sought the homes of the wealthy, places where rumors claimed precious things were kept, manuals, scrolls, and methods that could strengthen the body. True cultivation. These whispered secrets had circulated in the slums for years. To cultivate was to touch power. To become a cultivator was to rise above the fate of a powerless mortal. Very few ever saw real cultivators. Xu Qing himself had glimpsed them only once from the distance. Entering the city like beings from another world, he heard that the city lord was one, as were some of his guards. After days of searching through rubble, corpses, and mutated beasts, he finally discovered this bamboo slip in the residence of the city lord. He earned a deep wound in the process, but the reward was priceless. The slip contained a complete cultivation technique. He memorized every word immediately and began practicing it in secret. It was called the Mountains and Seas Art. Its teachings were simple yet strange: visualization of a carved totem combined with controlled breathing. The totem depicted a peculiar creature with a large head, a tiny body, and a single leg. Its skin was dark, and its face twisted into a sinister, ghost-like expression. Xu Qing had never seen such a being before, but the slip identified it as a Xiao. Now, as he cultivated, the image of the Xiao appeared vividly in his mind. His breathing shifted rhythmically. The air around him stirred with invisible movement. Faint strands of the world's remaining spiritual force drifted toward him, entering his body like thin currents of icy water. The cold was sharp and painful, as though his bones themselves were submerged in frozen streams. But he endured it. He always endured. When he finally completed the session, sweat drenched his body. Despite having eaten the meat of a vulture earlier, hunger gnawed at him again. This hunger had grown ever since he began cultivating. His body had also grown quicker, his reactions sharper. Exposure to the chilling energy hurt less than it had before. Every day he felt the faintest improvement, and that was enough. Peering through the crack in the rocks, he stared into the blackness outside. Distant roars echoed, rising and falling unpredictably, and his thoughts drifted to a memory from before sunset. A corpse slumped against a wall. located in the northeastern part of the city. Something about that corpse lingered in his mind. That part of the city was where the mysterious purple light had descended. And the corpse looked far too lifelike. The location of the corpse was in the northeastern area, and that body seemed like someone alive. Could it be that it has something to do with that purple light? If that person is alive, it might really have something to do with the purple light, but it might also be a trap. Xu Qing whispered these words to himself as he crouched in the dimness. His days wandering the ruined city had taught him a harsh truth. The creatures twisted by the gods' corruption were vicious beyond imagination. Stronger and more savage than the beasts they once were. But for now, because the Forbidden Zone was not yet fully formed, many of these abominations slept during the daylight hours. That was the only reason Xu Qing remained alive. Even so, he feared humans far more. He understood that the human heart could be darker, more unpredictable, and infinitely more treacherous than any mutated beast. So as he weighed the possibilities, his expression grew cold and resolute. Trap or not, he would have to return to that area. But not before preparing himself completely. His fingers tightened around the bamboo slip, the cultivation manual that had changed everything for him. Over the past several days, the small improvements brought by cultivation had strengthened his confidence. The bamboo slip's contents were now etched clearly in his memory, the methods of meditation and visualization, the breathing pattern, and also the broader explanation of cultivation itself. Cultivation, the slip said, originated in ancient times, even before the arrival of the fragmented face in the sky. Though the world had changed drastically, the general structure of cultivation remained the same: the stages of condensation, foundation building, core formation, and nascent soul. Realms beyond that were not recorded, as if they were either too rare or too unreachable for ordinary cultivators to comprehend. Yet these lofty realms were overshadowed by a dreadful truth. The god's aura had polluted all spiritual energy, transforming it into something harmful, an invisible poison that invaded all life. People called these corrupted particles anomalous substances. The chill Xu Qing felt coursing through him during cultivation was that very poison, slipping into his body alongside the spiritual energy he attempted to absorb. The bamboo slip made it clear what would happen once anomalous substances accumulated too heavily. A cultivator would either explode in a spray of blood or mutate into a monstrous, mindless beast. And when the god opened its eyes, the concentration of anomalous substances rose instantly and violently, transforming everything it touched. There was no safe path. But in this dying world, a life without cultivation was even more hopeless. The lifespan of ordinary humans was short, plagued by illness and danger. Survival in the slums was already a daily battle. For Xu Qing, the future risk of mutation felt distant compared to the immediate possibility of dying tomorrow. So rather than worrying about mutation in the future, he murmured to himself, "I should worry about surviving tomorrow." He pressed his palm against the wound on his chest, a painful reminder of the day he stole the bamboo slip from the city lord's residence. Blackening had spread across the edges of the injury over the past 2 days. A sign of contamination, yet the blood rain continued outside, and the air was thick with poison. There were no clean medicinal herbs left in the area. Everything in the city was tainted. As dawn approached, the roars and weeping cries from the darkness faded one by one until silence fell. Through the small gap in the rocks, Xu Qing saw the sky brighten slightly. He warmed his stiff limbs, shifted aside the stones blocking the entrance, and carefully checked his equipment, the rusted dagger tied to his thigh, the iron stick within easy reach, and the snake head wrapped in sackcloth. When he finally slipped out of the cave, he paused, scanning every direction. The stench of death hung in the cold wind, and breath escaping his mouth turned into pale mist. But his body, still warm from his preparations, endured it well. He sprinted across broken walls and collapsed dwellings, his movements swift and silent like a lean predator. High above, several birds circled the sky. Strange as it was, although nearly all life had perished when the god opened its eyes, birds had survived in greater numbers than any other species. They were now his primary source of food, and also the reason he had found the cave shelter earlier. But the cave was only one of 2 places he had discovered that provided some level of safety. The other lay near the city lord's residence. Even there, safety was relative. The corrupted monstrosities could still wander close at times. As Xu Qing approached the area he had scouted the previous day, he did not rush directly in. Instead, he climbed to a high vantage point and pressed himself flat against the crumbling surface. Narrowing his eyes, he peered down at the figure he had seen before. The man was still leaning against the wall exactly as he had been yesterday, clothing neat. Skin unblemished, posture unchanged. It was unnatural. If he were alive, he would not have survived a full night in the Forbidden Zone. If he were dead, he would have been torn apart by mutated beasts long ago. No corpse should have remained untouched in this place. Time passed. Xu Qing did not move. He was patient. One of the few advantages sharpened by a lifetime in the slums. Hours crawled by. When the sun was high behind the blood-colored clouds, he finally raised his hand and threw a stone. It struck the man with a loud crack. The figure toppled sideways like a lifeless puppet. And at the very instant the body shifted, a flash of purple light burst from the ground beneath where the figure had been sitting. Xu Qing's breath quickened, his eyes widening. He had searched for many days for the fallen purple beam he saw when the god opened its eyes. And now, it was right in front of him. He forced himself not to move immediately. Only after confirming that no danger stirred did he explode from his hiding place. Racing toward the shimmering object, he seized it, cold, smooth, glowing brilliantly, and sprinted away to a safer distance before stopping. Panting heavily, he stared at the item in his hand, a gleaming purple crystal. Beautiful and mysterious. Then he looked back. The corpse that had fallen sideways only moments ago had begun rotting at an impossible speed. Without the protection of the purple crystal, its flesh darkened, liquefied, and sank into itself until its skin became a greenish-black sludge. A chill rippled down Xu Qing's spine. He tightened his grip on the crystal and turned toward the cave. But after only a short distance, he suddenly halted. An odd itching sensation pulsed at his chest. He unwrapped the makeshift bandage and froze. The wound that had been blackened and infected only hours earlier. More than half of it had healed. Only a thin scar remained along the outer edges. This, Xu Qing breathed, stunned. Then he shifted his gaze to the purple crystal in his hand. This item, an intense gleam appeared in Xu Qing's eyes. The image of that perfectly undamaged corpse, sitting motionless before he had taken the purple crystal, flashed in his mind. He clutched the crystal tightly, his heart beating faster. It was no ordinary object. The way the corpse had remained untouched, the way his own injuries had healed after holding the crystal, suggested it held a power beyond comprehension. He realized, slowly but with clarity, that this crystal might allow the living to recover rapidly, and even preserve corpses from decay. The implications made Xu Qing's mind whirl. He surveyed his surroundings, alert as ever. The city was silent, lifeless, but he instinctively scanned every shadow. Treasures such as this were dangerous, especially in a place where the dead and the anomalous still lurked. Despite knowing there should be no other humans alive nearby, caution was second nature. Xu Qing could not linger here. He had to return to his cave, the one shelter he had secured, to study and hide this discovery. As he ran, he began to notice more than just the speed at which he moved. His stamina was remarkable, far beyond what it had been in days past. In previous efforts, sprinting for an hour would leave him exhausted, gasping for breath, his muscles trembling with fatigue. Now, he ran over an hour with only warmth in his body and a steady rhythm in his breath. Even his injuries seemed to fade as he moved. Each stride was effortless, his senses sharper. He even caught sight of a bird that landed briefly on the ground. Normally, he would have killed it immediately. But now he hesitated. He struck the bird to render it unconscious rather than dead, realizing that preserving life might extend the crystal's influence. Time passed quickly as he approached the cave. He arrived before nightfall, still cautious. Xu Qing's mind raced with possibilities. The god's opening of its eyes, the formation of the Forbidden Zone, and the blood rain had likely stirred other strange existences. Stories he had heard in the slums came to mind. Death attracts unusual beings. sometimes appearing at night, sometimes manifesting in ways that were unpredictable. He could not risk the crystal, not even for a moment. He moved swiftly into the cave, blocking the entrance behind him. Safe within the dim shelter, he sat cross-legged and opened his palm, letting the purple crystal illuminate the space. Its light painted his features with a soft purple glow, and for a moment, it was as if the cave itself breathed with energy. Xu Qing examined the crystal carefully. Rectangular, the size of his finger, with a flocule inside it, the source of the radiant purple light. The glow seemed alive, shifting subtly, pulsating with potential. He lifted his shirt and glanced at the wound on his chest. Astonishingly, 90% of the injury had already healed. Even the scar along its edges was diminishing. The realization struck him. The crystal's power was extraordinary. It not only healed wounds but restored vitality, eased fatigue, and enhanced physical strength. It was as though it provided a second life, a safeguard against the cruel world outside. Xu Qing wondered what other effects it might possess, though he sensed a connection between the crystal and the god's presence when it had opened its eyes. He understood that this treasure was his alone, at least for now. Once the blood rain ended and the city reopened to other beings, the crystal's possession would be far more dangerous. To protect it, he needed to hide it, and so, he began a careful experiment. He turned his attention to the unconscious bird. He examined it thoroughly, ensuring it remained silent. Then, using his dagger, he made a precise incision, small but deep enough to place the crystal within its body. As he did this, he observed a strange phenomenon. Spirit energy surged from the environment, flowing into the bird. The energy was far stronger than any he had drawn during cultivation, rushing into every cell of the creature's body. The bird struggled violently, stronger than he could have anticipated. Xu Qing had to exert his full strength to restrain it, his arms straining against the force. It was unlike anything he had experienced. The spirit energy amplified the creature's strength beyond normal limits. Yet, after a moment, the crystal's influence stabilized. The bird ceased struggling, its body now infused with a remarkable vitality. It was alive, empowered, and seemingly unharmed. Satisfied, Xu Qing carefully removed the crystal, wiped it clean, and sat in contemplation. If the crystal could heal, restore energy, and even amplify the strength of living beings, its potential was nearly limitless. But there was no safer place to keep it than inside his own body. He made a decisive choice. With determination, Xu Qing inserted the purple crystal into his still healing chest wound. Pain shot through him as he pressed it into place. But he endured it, teeth gritted, mind focused. The crystal fused with his body, merging its energy with his own. Immediately, a rumbling resonated from within, and waves of spirit energy flooded around him. The energy was immense, far surpassing what he had experienced with the bird. It seeped into the soil, flowed through the cave, and surged into every fiber of his being. Xu Qing's body glowed with a faint blue light as a chill of anomalous substances coursed through him. It was intense and overwhelming, but he was prepared. He did not hesitate. Drawing upon his training in the mountains and seas art, Xu Qing began circulating his energy, guiding the surge of spirit energy through his body with precise control. The crystal's infusion, combined with his cultivation method, promised recovery, enhancement, and an amplification of his abilities. And so, as the flood of energy continued to fill him, Xu Qing maintained focus, knowing that every moment of careful circulation could determine whether he mastered the power of the crystal or suffered its backlash. However, Xu Qing was long prepared. At this moment, he didn't hesitate to directly circulate his energy according to the mountains and seas art. In this episode, we saw Xu Qing struggle to survive in a city devastated by the god's fragmented face, where mutated beasts and corrupted life threatened every corner. Throughout this episode, he carefully navigated the ruins, learned the mountains and seas art from a mysterious bamboo slip, and began cultivating his body and spirit despite the dangerous anomalous substances around him. He also discovered a powerful purple crystal that healed his injuries, restored his stamina, and enhanced his vitality, giving him a rare advantage in this harsh world. Xu Qing's journey in this episode showed his intelligence, determination, and adaptability, proving that survival is just the beginning of a much greater adventure. What happens next? Stay tuned for the next episode of Outside of Time. If you enjoyed this episode or found it exciting, don't forget to like the video and subscribe to the channel to get the latest updates on Xu Qing's journey. Thank you for watching, and we'll see you in the next episode.